What I didn't realize is that this is what I didn't realize that I put the spreadsheet in the share folder, so Mark has access to edit it. That's the only reason it says that. Like I was just gonna leave it, but fair enough.
Got this. Oh, I actually need my phone. I have notes written.
Good afternoon, everybody. Our last day together.
I can't believe it.
Isn't that sad?
Devastating.
I like your shirt.
Thank you.
Where did that come from?
An online store.
Cool.
Yeah,
It's got a hummingbird in the middle of
it
it.
does have a hummingbird in the
Looks
middle.
like a broad-tailed hummingbird. But I don't know.
Yeah, you would know better than me.
What's the genus species?
Oh, no. Order family.
Attack drone.
Now, I don't have to ask Michelle where she got that shirt because I know.
Yeah, that's what it is true.
I actually have one exactly like it, so.
We could all be twinning. You could have worn yours. I should know. I got
All righty.
it. The birds aren't real.
Are we ready for this swan song today?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I have just arbitrarily picked an order for those to go today. And so the group with the special t-shirts get to go first.
Well, I'm not wearing a special t-shirt.
Yeah, you are.
How do you know? It's green.
Wait,
Or whatever color
It's
it
like
is.
green.
All right, in which case, let's get going. You guys just all busted the chops to get going here.
We're ready.
Yes, you are.
So.
Me too.
Yeah.
I am excited too. Who gets this first?
It me.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
Hey, you want to fight right now?
Aggressive behavior.
That was agonistic behavior if I ever saw it. You want to wreck right now?
This is not about displays.
Okay, but like,
Song.
Molly's trying to like right now.
All right.
Okay. All right, so we're going to be talking about a bird that's very familiar to all of us, the red-winged blackbird. So our presentation is a comprehensive analysis of the geographical differences in red-winged blackbirds' songs. So a brief introduction, we've like kind of went over a lot of this information, so it's more just like a brief reminder of that. The blackbirds here, the red-winged blackbirds, they actually are generally like non-migratory, so they're going to be residential birds that live here all year round, and they can live in a variety of different like types of marshes. So it can be anywhere from like where we were in the Bend region to like over here where it's a lot more wet. So any types of marshes that fall in that range. They're also super territorial. They exhibit territorial polygyny, and actually of course the male can pair bond with multiple females, at times up to 15 females in a harem, which makes them one of the most highly polygynous of all bird species. Females, as we've talked about, choose their males based on the territory that the male holds, so they want the better territory. And the displays that the males exhibit are generally for male-to-male competition and have really little to do with female attraction. So vocalizations, as a lot of female birds, they don't exhibit song learning. The males that, if they're isolated from other males in the area and like when they're growing up from like a fledgling, they actually won't have like a normal red-winged blackbird song. It'll be pretty abnormal. So that kind of demonstrates that the song learning behavior is super important in red-winged blackbirds for proper development. And both males and females have calls. And females often like call at a higher rate when it comes to like alarm calls, so like alerting that there's danger. And males, this is kind of interesting, they can specifically target females. So when they're calling like for courtship, they can actually like target which female specifically instead of just like all the birds in the area. So there's a lot of different types of calls. Contact calls. So this is often the males communicating with the females that like, oh, I'm here, I'm in proximity. And so those are often a variety of check calls is what they're called. There are threat calls, which there are 7 different types of threat calls. A couple of them, most of them actually being check calls. So like chick, chuck, chink, etc. They sound a lot like that. Alarm and distress calls, same thing, a lot of check calls, as well as there's a cheer call. And a cheer call is their most high-pitched call, and that's used for like warning that there's hawks around, for except for hawks. Courtship calls. So the females and the males often do like this TTT call, and so that's kind of like showing that they're courting, as well as feeding calls. So oftentimes the males and the females, when they're approaching the nest to feed the nestlings, they will have like a little chitter or chat call. So that literally translates to "Tina, you fat lard, come get your dinner." So then the females often like will get like a soft pook call, and so that encourages the nestlings to beg for food. And so those begging calls will increase as the nestlings get older. And so around day 10, you can actually hear the nestlings like calling from in the proximity of like 100 meters. And so it's actually kind of interesting too. This call specifically for the nestlings, it makes it so they're not easily like found. It like delocalizes them from predators. And also there's flight calls. So this is like one of the longer calls that the male will give when he's leaving the territory. It'll be like up to 6 seconds, and it's like a complex call. Oops, sorry. There we go. Okay. So the actual male song itself is a buzz or a trill sound. It has some sort of introductory note and then goes on to a trill. So it's either Oka-Lee if it doesn't have like a terminal note, and then it'll be Oka-Lee ink if it does. And so that ending determining like note can often distinguish between different populations of red-winged blackbirds. There's a lot of geographical variation in red-winged blackbird populations. And yeah, like I said, the slowly modulated trill or ending terminal note will often distinguish those. And they sing throughout the year, as we've kind of heard them this whole semester. They do it most during the breeding season, which is important to note because that's when territoriality happens. So they often sing in early morning or dusk, and they can actually have a repertoire of up to 9 songs that are acoustically distinct. And those songs are actually stable from year to year. So they have like, it's pretty like it's a repetition. So the actual function of these songs, one of the main ones being territory defense, obviously, as I mentioned before. Territory, it's going to be a lot of like male to male competition, like this is my territory kind of deal. But actually, if you remove their capability of singing, we also talked about this, other birds will like try to move into that territory. So that's showing that it just has a really important role in that way. And also the male songs used for courting. The female kind of has like this chit song that they do, and then the male song kind of like overlaps with that to create like a kind of interesting duet. And females can actually discriminate between species to species and also male songs. And so it's kind of funny, but like the females don't respond more to their male than they do to like other males. And we know that because like they participate in like EPCs and such. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And also these 2 last points are probably the most important. Males can discriminate from neighbor to non-neighboring birds. And so that's really important, as well as both sexes discriminate from distant and non-distant geographical song variants. And so that leads us into our research.
You know what? I might just hold this, or maybe I'll and drop it at the same time. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so our research question for this was, how does the red-winged blackbird male song vary based on neighborhood and regional location differences? So our hypothesis for this was that the differences between the songs of the male red-winged blackbirds in Fernhill/Basket Slough and Bend, which is a regional difference, will be significantly greater than the differences between Fernhill and Basket Slough, which would only be a neighborhood difference. So this is just kind of a map showing the areas that we went to do our recordings. So the most northern circle up there is approximately where Fernhill Wetlands is. This map did not have Forest Grove. I couldn't find a map with Forest Grove on it. So I just went west of Hillsborough and went with it. And then the circle that is around Dallas up there, that's approximately where Basket Slough is. And then, of course, in Central Oregon, there's the circle for Bend. And so Basket Slough and Fernhill are approximately 44 miles apart. And then Basket Slough and Bend are 145 miles apart. And Fernhill and Bend are 177 miles apart. So just to kind of show the difference between those distances there. So on to methods. So the materials that we used were high quality sound recording equipment provided to us by Don R. Powers, PhD. And Donald R. Powers, PhD. And the recording equipment in this picture is not actually the recording equipment we use, but I could not find a picture of it. This one is a little bit newer, but it's very similar. And then, of course, we used the Ravenlight software for the song analysis, which was provided through Cornell University. So the general timeline of what we ended up doing was on April 5th, all four of us went to Tualatin River Wildlife Refuge in Sherwood with the recording equipment, but we had no luck. We actually did hear some red-winged blackbirds there, but they were way beyond where the fenced-off area was, and so we couldn't go near them. So having no luck, we relocated to Shampooey State Park, but unfortunately, there were not any red-winged blackbirds there at all. We went when it was pretty sunny and cold outside, and it was around 7 a.m. So, so to try again, on April 7th, a couple days later, Molly and I went to Basket Slough with the recording equipment around 2 p.m. after our lecture that day. It was also the day that it was like 75 degrees outside, so it was a really good day to do it. And we made multiple successful song recordings there. We pulled over on the side of, I believe it's Livermore Road, and we got lots of recordings right off of there. And then on April 15th, so about a week later, Molly and Liesel and I went to Fernhill Wetlands and made an immediate song recording, basically as soon as we got out of the car. So that was really nice. We weren't entirely sure what to expect from that trip because it was really foggy on the way over, and it was still foggy when we got there, but the birds were still singing. The song recordings from Bend were provided actually by my parents because we did not have time to go to Bend on our own. So they went to the Old Mill District on April 15th around 10 a.m. and they recorded it on a recording device they had and then sent it to me as a WAV file. Oh no.
All right, the thing we've all been waiting for, actually listening to the bird. All right, so this is the first recording that we actually got, which was from Basket Slough. And so just to give you an idea of what they sound like.
One of sounded like this, just in the way that there are more steps later in the recording. Yeah. I think there's gonna get closer.
Yeah. Only hear me breathing in the background, but we'll just pause that. I was hiking through grass, it's hard. But this is the best recording we got from that. And as you can kind of see, this lower part, my hands are shaking, so I can't use the laser. But this is the first note, and then this is the harmonic part. And so the starting note was about 1600 hertz. And the whole song was 0.99 seconds total, so a second. And then the first harmonic ranged from like 15,381 hertz, and the second harmonic was 8,486. So the difference between those was about 7,000. And the next recording is a little better, and I'll show you what I mean by the first and second harmonic. But overall, the first harmonic showed a higher max amplitude of 22.6 kilounits. And then the second amplitude was 7, so that showed a decrease. And overall, both frequency and amplitude decreased from the first harmonic to the second harmonic. So this is a little nicer to look at. This is where we stepped right outside of the band and got a recording.
That's what brings her a little bit quicker in this. So
Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So that was still a red-winged blackbird. So as you can kind of see, we still have that first starting note, which was actually lower. It was at 13,000 hertz, 1,300 hertz. And so this recording shows the harmonics that I'm talking about. So the first harmonic is this one, which is the oak, and then this is the link, like the lead. There we go. And so these, the first harmonic is this one, second harmonic this one. As you can see, there's a lot of different notes within that. And so this total song was about a second long, same as the basket slew recording. The first resonance had a larger range of hertz, which was 20,287. And then the second resonance had 14,000, but they've also decreased at about 6,000, which was similar to basket slew. The first max amplitude, which was recorded right here, was 21 kilounits, and the second one, which was recorded right here, was 19, and that also showed a decrease like basket slew. Wait, no. There we go. Now, this is where things start to get spicy. So the first starting note, again, well, this is bend. The first starting note is again at 16,000 or 1,600, sorry. But the total was only 0.8 seconds long. That's a little smaller, shorter than the rest. But as you can kind of see, this is different from the ones before. And if we listen to it, you'll probably know why. That sounded different. That is a trill, which was not seen in the other ones. So this trill had about 18 units in it, and that's in the second harmonic. So each of those was about 0.0203 seconds, and that totaled for about 0.6 seconds of the whole song, which is longer than the second harmonic in the other ones, which was about 0.3 seconds of the whole song. Also, the first max amplitude was 3 kilounits, and then the second was 21. So that showed an increase in volume. And then the first resonance was 5,852, and the second, which is the trill, is 3,657. So this shows again, a decrease in the range, but this kind of makes more sense because they're adding more complexity into the second part, which is the trill. Yes. Key difference. Trill. And I'll pass this on. No. Stop. There we go.
Okay, so how do we like interpret these sonograms? In general, the total length of the songs were similar. So like we said, the first two were about 1 second, and the one from Bend was a little shorter, but in general about 1 second in length. For each bird from the three populations, the second group of harmonic notes were a smaller frequency range than the first one, as Molly mentioned. And then talking about just Fernhill and Basket Slew, they had very similar sounding songs, with the main difference being the Fernhill red-winged blackbirds split the first note into 2 smaller notes. So if we can go back and look. Yeah, so you can see right here in the Fernhill song, this first note is actually split into two instead of just being one straight note, like it is in the basket slew song. No, okay. Okay. And this we think could just be due to singular bird differences. So just one individual bird, they're all going to have a very, very slightly different noise or song that they sing. And we think that this just small first break in the note, since the whole rest of the songs are very similar, that could be due to just differences in individuals rather than a whole population. Some other differences we found was that the Fernhill song started at a lower frequency, and both Bend and Basket Slew started at more similar frequencies. The biggest difference, however, as Molly mentioned, was the trill that was found in the Red-winged Blackbird songs that was not found, the Bend Red-winged Blackbird songs that was not found in the Basket Slew or Fernhill songs. So circling back to our hypothesis, we hypothesized that the difference between the songs in Fernhill / Basket Slew and Bend would be significantly greater than the differences between Fernhill and Basket Slew, because one is a regional difference and one is just a neighborhood difference. And according to our song analyses, and like I mentioned on the previous slide, the Red-winged Blackbird song from Bend was more different than the song from Fernhill and Basket Slew. This supports our original hypothesis that there is greater difference between regions than neighborhoods. And this is also supported by other studies that have looked at songs in various types of birds between different places around the country. They also have found pretty consistently that there is a difference in song across a geographical variant. So why is the song different? The songs still, all three of them, they're recognizable as Red-winged Blackbird songs. If I were to play either one of those, most of us hopefully would realize that, oh, that's a Red-winged Blackbird, even though there are multiple differences. This is because the frequency range of the harmonics is nearly identical in each of the three regions. But what does vary between them is the speed and the number of syllables. So like the trill in the Bend song. The differences between the songs in the regions is probably due to evolution and variation in individual song learning. A lot of studies have shown that, like, for example, with the Red-winged Blackbird, the males are the ones that have the dominant song, and they're also the ones that are territorial in their mating. So when they have 15 females they're mating with, those fledglings are all going to learn from that territorial male. However, like I mentioned, they all learn their songs a little bit differently. So as those birds grow and eventually maybe become the territorial bird, that dominant song is going to get changed just a little bit. So as this happens over time, different populations are going to have different sounding songs ultimately in the end. Another factor, though, may be the fact that the Red-winged Blackbird recordings we got in Bend were taken in the middle of an urban area, whereas the Red-winged Blackbird songs we got in Basket Slew and Fernhill were in more rural areas. And other studies have shown that there is a correlation between anthropogenic noise, which is noise made by humans, and variation in Red-winged Blackbird songs. So maybe there's always sounds of like cars going by or people going by. This causes the birds to change things in their song to make sure that it's heard by other birds in the population. And here's a nice video we took at Mal here of some Red-winged Blackbird sounds, mostly being fleshed out by yellow-headed blackbird sounds, because it's just horrible.
Fond reminiscing for you guys.
You can hear the trills.
They're just going crazy. Okay. And our literature cited. Any questions?
So you said that the Bend recordings were from a more urban area, correct?
They were in the Old Mill District, which is like right in the middle of town along the river.
So if you are potentially attributing differences to being a place where there's just more noise, it's just not nature noises. Are the differences that you see in the songs there versus those in Fernhill or basket slew. Basket slew is one?
Yep.
Are they consistent with that hypothesis? Because there are certain characteristics of songs that change in urban versus rural areas. It's a pretty hot area study. So are the differences that you see consistent with that?
If I remember correctly, yes, because the complexities of the song usually increase when birds are in urban areas. And so we saw like an increase in, like, I guess, syllables and trill that kind of puts it out and makes it stand out from the
Any other questions? Spotted towhees next.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Smith, and for this project, my group members were David Shupp, Ian Van Gordon, and Sylvia Root. And today we'll be presenting on our bird of interest, the spotted towhee. And so this project had multiple research questions. One research question that we will start out with was how urban noise affects birdsong. And we did this by comparing the song characteristics of the spotted towhee in two environments, one with more of an urban noise and one with just more of a rural environment. And so that noise just, we're wondering if that noise would affect their song structure. And so it is known that anthropogenic noise, or otherwise known as noise pollution, is a severe problem for all birds and must be dealt with accordingly if they want to survive and just adapt to their environment. It is known that this type of noise negatively affects avian distribution by providing an unfavorable or more unfavorable environment for birds, where some species tend to avoid urban areas because of the compromises on fitness. And we all know that the two components of fitness in which birds are just thoroughly invested in are survivorship and reproduction. Mostly noise in this category of anthropogenic noise in the urban environments involves low frequency sounds caused by like traffic vehicles, and tends to mask birds that have this lower frequency calls and songs. And so songs are one area that birds use to attract mates in their environments and are often lower frequency, as I mentioned. And some species have complex songs, such as the song sparrow, but others have kind of less complex songs, such as the spotted towhee. But they are still used in a similar way to attract mates and do things such as territoriality. Both birds must adapt to their situations with dealing with this anthropogenic noise by either changing their song structure, frequency, amplitude, to broadcast a song that is heard and often understood by the opposite sex, where they actually want to mate, or they're attracting a mate. And so some trends that have been noticed in previous studies related to noise were seen in some studies testing common blackbirds, vocal communication, and birds tend to raise their frequency, they noticed, in urban environments that are already filled with low frequency. And so in those urban environments, they're just going to be raising their pitch, basically. And also there was some evidence that amplitude also would be increased based on more of an urban environment. And so, yeah, and so in this study, we wanted to test the effects of urban noise on the spotted towhee by comparing song characteristics in 2 locations with varying noise environments, as I mentioned earlier, and that being the George Fox University campus, and which is the more urban area because of just the traffic flowing through. There's going to be a lot more noise for them there. And then in an environment with more rural setting, being the Tualatin National Wildlife Refuge, far in on the trail, where basically right next to the river, where there wasn't really that much low frequency noise being built up. And yeah, pass it on to David.
So a little bit about the spotted towhee. They're a passerine bird in the family Passerellidae, genus Pipilo, species Maculatus. Probably didn't pronounce that right. They are more common in the southern and western United States, and they occupy a really large range of environments from urban to rural. They have a pretty unique trill call, and they tend to call a lot more often than those other sparrows. You've probably heard them all over campus and on our trips. All right, so for their song characteristics, it's a fairly simple song, and it mainly consists of a short introductory phase followed by a trill phase. Although sometimes they only display the trill phase, and these can range from slow trills to fast and buzzy ones. And the average length of a trill in Oregon is 0.9 seconds. What's interesting is that coastal birds generally only sing trills, while interior individuals will often display both. And there were 4 to 9 different song types recognized in the individual males. And it was found that song sharing occurs in a high degree between males in neighboring territories, so they can, learn each other's songs pretty frequently. And then song matching is also present during counter singing between neighboring males. And that means that they can pretty much like mimic each other's songs, which I thought was interesting. And then their call characteristics, the common mew call, which is probably the one that we've all heard. It's given during scoldings or mobbing, or when they're feeding undisturbed. And it is uttered by both sexes, but may be answered with aggression by nearby males when played. And the call is described as a long, nasal, and slurred sound, and has unique modulation. And then the average agitated call is 0.65 seconds, while the average calm call is about 0.56 seconds. And this functions partly as an alarm or disturbance call, but it has broader message functions as well.
Sorry, big differences with the mic. Okay, so there was a study done with cardinals, which are fairly closely related to sparrows. They're both in the order Passeriformes, at least, about how much songs can vary on a neighborhood level. And it was found that they do vary quite a bit depending on the neighborhood where the male bird lives. The cardinals had several distinct syllables in their songs, and the number of sounds in those syllables were quite different depending on the neighborhood. Birds within the same neighborhood tended to be more similar than birds from different neighborhoods. They weren't identical, but they tended to learn the same song patterns and copied from each other, like with the towhees. So the components that were analyzed in the study were the whole song, like the length, the individual syllables and then the sound units within those syllables. And so it was found that when cardinal chicks were taken away from their parents and raised together, they had rather similar songs, sort of like an artificially created neighborhood. Regardless of where the chicks came from originally. So it was based on how they learned the songs together, not on their genetic heritage. But chicks that were taken away from their parents and raised in isolation all came up with different songs, and those songs were all fairly abnormal. Not what you would expect from a bird that was just hatched in the wild, raised normally. So our methods, we went to 2 different locations in Oregon. One was here in Newburgh. We went down into the canyon on campus and recorded towhee songs. And the other was the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge, using recording equipment borrowed from the class. Field recorders have been imported into the Raven Light software and analyzed for a few different variables, including the syllables in each trill, the length of the phrases, time between phrases, frequency, and the minimum and maximum amplitude of the songs.
All right, and so for the first research question, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to investigate how the characteristics of the spotted towhee song differ on the neighborhood level, being in George Fox University and Sherwood, in the Tualatin National Wildlife Refuge, related to frequency, amplitude, syllable number, song length, and time between song phrases. And we hypothesized, based on our previous research, that the spotted towhee song will have higher frequency and amplitude in the more urban environments at George Fox University, but will have a similar song length and time between song phrases. And so this was one of the recordings that we had in the canyon at the George Fox University campus. And here I'm going to play it. So as you can see, just the definitive like trill nature of each of these phrases, with just the higher frequency measured in kilohertz right there. And once we imported this into Raven Light software, we were able to analyze this song. And the categories, the syllable number, we basically just analyzed about 4 trills, as seen above right there. And the syllable numbers all were the same, consistently 6. And then the min and max amplitudes were seen right there, with the frequencies in the next row, and then the song durations and time between trills. And just in a little bit, we were going to compare the data that we had from Newburgh to Sherwood. This was the recording that we gathered at Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge in the more rural environment.
Sherwood can be recorded too.
There's another bird that's singing with these trills, obviously. But these were the ones that the spotted towhee was singing. And as you can see, it's just very, just different in composition, the sonogram. And so, as David mentioned earlier, the song of a towhee could be just a typical trill, but also could be an introductory note before the trill. And as you can see from these 4 trills that were in this sonogram right here, there is definitely an introductory note, and then there's notes that are stacked on each other. And you can just see that that's a harmonic because there's just a series of overtones that are stacked on each other before the actual trill. And so this was the data in a similar format than the Newberg Spotted Towhee song. But I just wanted to mention that the syllable count was different in each of the trills that we analyzed, with the first one being 7, then 8, and then 8, and then 9. And so it's just, there's been a lot of variability between the two neighborhoods relating to syllables. And then just min amplitude, max amplitude, frequency, song duration, time between trills was just the rest of the table. And so with that data, I calculated some averages and then compared them in these columns with the Newberg and Sherwood. And as you can see, the max amplitude was significantly lower in Sherwood, and this was in a more rural environment. And the max amplitude is higher in Newberg, and that can be maybe attributed to they're trying to raise their amplitude as well as frequency, with the frequency being significantly higher in Sherwood because they want to go over that low frequency noise to project a call that is heard and understood by mates. Song duration was very similar, and the time between trills was a lot longer in Sherwood. The next research question that we had was related to the call, and basically the same kind of format, but the research question was, how do the characteristics of the spotted towhee's call differ based on call length and time between calls in nearby neighborhoods? And we hypothesized that the spotted towhee's call will be similar in both neighborhoods based on call length and time between calls, but has potential for variability based on the expression of the recorded bird. And we said that because they can either have an agitated call or a calm call. And so that's what we had in mind when formatting this hypothesis. And here are some of the recordings related to the calls. The first one was just a small segment of the Newberg spotted towhee call. And I'm just going to play that one right now.
Newberg towhee recording 3, part 2.
And you can definitely just see the modulation of the call as it rises when it's just doing that chirping noise, as David mentioned earlier, the mute call. And then the bottom one is the spotted towhee and Sherwood call. And so originally we thought that frequency and amplitude might be a good thing to investigate with the call. But once we imported it into Raven Light, it was just difficult to see the frequencies within that range, and there wasn't really too much of an output. And so we just decided to do call duration and time between calls. And these are the data that was extracted from those two sonograms. And then we calculated some averages, and overall, they were very similar call durations. But then again, it could be very variable based on what they're feeling, their expressions, whether agitated or calm. But we suggested that these are most likely calm calls, as they were around 0.56 seconds rather than being over 0.6. And the time between the calls was just a longer period of time in Sherwood compared to Newberg.
After looking at neighborhoods, we wanted to look at the difference between the calls in different regions. And we actually found a study looking at nightingale wrens, and the study went over how northern and southern nightingale wrens tend to have a lot more variability in frequency between the two. However, the time between songs and calls and the duration of songs and calls is usually pretty constant between the two regions. And one thing that it did mention is that small changes in morphology between birds in different regions can affect the modulation of the bird songs and calls. However, I couldn't find anything significantly different that would change the modulation between the spotted towhees in different regions.
So for this second part of our project, we didn't look at quite as many variables. We only looked at song duration, syllable number, and time between trills. We obtained recordings of California spotted towhees from various sources. And yeah, none of us actually traveled to California, so we couldn't quite verify the accuracy of their amplitude or frequency data. So the parts we had to go on were the duration, the syllable number, and the time between trills, because those were definitely accurate.
All right, our research question for the second part of our project was, will the interval between songs and calls or duration of songs and calls be different depending on the difference in regions that the towhees are in? And we hypothesized that if the songs of two different spotted towhees from two different regions are compared, the interval between the songs and the durations of the calls and songs will be similar. And like Sylvia was saying, we actually didn't go to California to get a recording. We tried to get a Ravensoft file from the Macaulay lab, and we couldn't get it in time for the presentation. So what we ended up doing was we played the files off Daniel's phone and we recorded the audio from the speaker and put it into Ravensoft with the shotgun microphone. And just compare, the towhee that we used for the Oregon towhee was the Newberg one.
Newberg towhee song 41.
And this is the song, obviously. And this is the California recording that we got. And in the California towhee, you can hear there's a lot more syllables in the trill, or a lot more peaks in the trill. And one other thing I wanted to mention was, since we recorded this from a speaker and it wasn't from an actual bird, we couldn't look at the amplitude and the frequency, but we could look at the intervals between calls and songs and the duration of the calls and songs. And this is the data we got for both spotted towhees. The Oregon spotted towhee, like I said, is the one from Newberg. And the duration of each song was around 0.6 seconds to 0.7 seconds. And the time between each of the trills was around 2.5 to 3 seconds. However, the California spotted towhee was meaningfully longer, with it being 0.8 seconds to 1.15 seconds. And the number of syllables also significantly increased. Like Daniel said, the Newberg towhee across the board had 6 syllables, while the California spotted towhee had between 16 and 22. And the time between each of the trills was overall longer in the California spotted towhee compared to the Oregon towhee. And now for the call, here's the Newberg call again.
43.
And then this was the California call. And then breaking down those numbers a little bit, the call duration was actually pretty similar between the two birds in each region, but the time between calls, again, was meaningfully different. So our hypothesis for this one was rejected. The California spotted towhee had longer songs than the Oregon, and the time between songs and calls was longer in the Californian. And however, the time between the calls of both birds was actually similar, unlike the songs. And some reasons that this could be is we actually don't know whether or not the area that the California towhee was recorded in was more urban or rural. That could be a difference since the Newburgh one was more rural than was more urban. The California one might have been more rural. That might be a factor. And another factor could be the presence of other bird species, and hearing other songs can have an overall impact on an individual bird's songs. So that could be another reason. Just different species being in California than Oregon. Obviously, a lot will be the same, but that could be another reason why for the differences.
So in summary, urban environments with more background noise, and the towhees tended to have songs with higher frequency and amplitude, so they could project a bit more above the background noise and still be able to hear each other. Call duration was similar between regions, but could be quite variable. Dialect differences were observed between the Oregon towhees and the California towhees. And time between calls varied between all different regions. And our references.
So,
No.
but I have one. I have a couple, actually. So you did compare amplitudes between your two local populations. Did you control for the distance you were from the birds when you recorded?
We tried to.
Because that will impact amplitude. Whether you are away or lower the amplitudes.
Sometimes it's hard to tell how far we were away though, because towhees like to hang out in the undergrowth and you can always see the bird that we're recording.
There's like a lot of foliage in the way because they're having the shrubs more so. We tried to account for that by basically going as close as we can before it stops singing. So
Yeah, you probably would have had a more effective analysis, maybe looking at, ratios of between high and low amplitude or something that the absolute amplitude is probably going to be really hard to control for. My other question is, if I am reading the tea leaves correctly, these comparisons are based on single birds. How can you be certain that the differences that you're seeing are not individual differences rather than regional differences?
yeah, it's something we didn't really investigate.
We did record a few different individual birds.
But we only really account for just single ones.
Yeah, it might have been good to make measurements on the different birds that you calculated, that you measured, that you even if you don't play them or show the sound dimensional to see how different they were. And then one other thing, I know I'm the one of the things since you didn't know where the California reporting, whether it was rural or urban, one thing that you might have done is to go ahead and include both of your local birds in that analysis, because you're suggesting that one's urban and one's local, looking to see which one of those the California bird was more similar to. That may have been a useful comparison. All right, I'll stop asking questions. Anybody else have any questions?
Maddie,
No,
you sure you don't have anything to say? Okay, everyone's looking at you, Maddie.
All right, thank you. Next up, chickadees.
Okay, hello everyone. My name's Jim Sky. Really? And Carly.
Exactly.
And today we're going to be talking about our study that we did, which looked at black-capped chickadee songs in the morning versus evening and seeing similarities and differences between that. So before we begin, here's a table of contents of what's going to happen. First, we will give some background information on the chickadee themselves. Then we will discuss our introduction and hypothesis that we used to complete this study. And then next we'll look at results and discussion of the study and give our final thoughts of the presentation.
This is the black-capped chickadee. It's in the family Paridae and Passeriformes. Its habitat is forest, parks, and some suburban areas. It eats seeds, berries, and insects, and generally nests in cavities. And the chickadees have around 16 different vocalizations. The chickadee call has different functions, as the location signal, mobbing signal, or all clear, or food source signal.
So here is a well, here's a diagram explaining the vocalizations, which we kind of covered in class. We'll just do it very briefly. You start off with the HVC, which is the high vocal center, and then travel down to the RA, and then down here, up here. You head to the motor neurons and the RAM, and that's kind of the basics of the of vocalization. To continue on,
So the song is influenced by external factors in the morning and evening, and singing is presumably more costly in the morning rather than at night because of external factors such as cold air or lack of having food overnight. The black-capped chickadees will also lengthen their vocalization in noisy areas. One study by Porter in 2020 showed that chickadees raise the frequency of their songs in response to traffic noise to overcome masking effects. And they also noted that physiologically, the low frequencies may be able to be sung longer. And both times that we recorded high frequency sounds, there were traffic noises in the background.
So some songbirds have been shown to have a daily cycle of frequency, which is part of the reason we are studying this. Wood et al. 2013 found that zebrafishes exhibit a daily cycle of frequency in their song. Frequencies rose in the early morning, starting off kind of at a mid-level, rising in pitch towards the afternoon, and then falling in the evening. And on average, frequency of songs are going to be higher in the morning and lower in the evening. Your analysis.
So based on the information we collected in the introduction, we formulated a question, will the time of day induce a change in the song of the black-capped chickadee? And also from the information collected previously that we explained, we hypothesized that the chickadee song in the evening will have a lower frequency than the chickadee song in the morning.
So for our methods, we went out on 3 different trial periods, and when the data was collected, we went out near sunrise and near sunset, so around 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. The chickadees were recorded either in the canyon or near the Hess Creek Canyon. It was mainly on the north end of campus. The black-capped chickadee song was collected using a Marantz solid state recorder and a Sennheiser microphone, which is what we all used. The recordings were analyzed using Raven Light software from the Cornell lab, and the statistical analysis was performed using Google Sheets, taking the averages for high frequency, low frequency, changes in frequency, and the song length for both the morning and evening. So the song sounds of the chickadee, the phoebe sound is typically used by mates to separate themselves from the flock. In the winter, and the call is most frequently used in April and July, April through July. This call is typically almost never used within close proximity to another male. That is the phoebe sound. The gargle sound is most frequently given when 2 birds are in close proximity at feeders and flocks during violations of individual distance and during territorial encounters. It is also the most complex and can have 2 to 14 different notes with spaces in between each note. It also serves as a warning between chickadees to get out of each other's personal space, or the invading chickadee will be attacked by the dominant chickadee. That's the gargle sound. And the last sound that we have here is the chickadee sound, which is the call that we chose to analyze because it's given most consistently by both sexes. And the chickadee sound, the DD part, can be repeated a variable number of times depending on the purpose of the call. One purpose could be to warn for predators. So for our analysis, we went and we looked at each individual call. And we looked at the high frequency, the low frequency, and the length of the call. And we did this for each individual little section of the call. So each one of these guys right here. And we did that for the morning and the evening. So that was a sample from the morning data that we collected. And then the evening, we did the same thing. We looked at each individual little song right here. And took the high and low frequency, the change in the frequency and the length of the song. Songs of the chickadee are characterized by a narrow frequency range, moderate pitch with each note varying a little in pitch and no sharp onsets or terminations. So here's a sample from the evening recording. All right, so this figure is depicting the overall low frequency, high frequency, and the change in frequency. The purple bar represents the average flow frequency of the chickadee song, being around 3,400 hertz for the morning and 35 hertz for the evening, 3,500 hertz for the evening. The pink bar represents the average high frequency of the chickadee song, being around 5,500 hertz for the morning and 4,900 hertz for the evening. The gray bar represents the average change in frequency and being around 2,000 hertz in the morning and 1,400 hertz in the evening.
So these are two different graphs that looked at the averages of the high and low frequencies of the data collected. So on the left, you can see that the morning had a low frequency of 3,418.888, and then the evening had a low frequency of 3,556.415. You can see on here that these error bars do overlap, showing that they are significant to one another. And then looking at the high frequency of the song, the morning had a frequency of 5,485.28, and the evening had a high frequency of 4,911.073. And these don't appear to overlap, or the error bars don't show much overlap between these guys. And then this graph shows the change in frequency of the song. The morning showed a 2019.293 frequency change, and the evening showed a 1,355.746. Again, there is no overlap between the error bars, showing that they're not statistically significant to one another. Sorry.
So we also looked at the length of the songs. You can see that the average in the morning was 1.259 seconds, and in the evening was 1.354. But the error bars are overlapping, so this was not a significant change. So this is, as with all the others, it's a 95% confidence interval. So we did not have significant results. Did not have significant results in the change of time. So we did have significant differences in the frequency change, and this is the study that we mentioned earlier by Wood et al. And this is part of the reason we're studying this, is that they found that, well, first of all, how they did their study is they took groups of male zebra finches. They isolated them for at least a week in sound dampening chambers, so that they got all thoughts of talking to each other out of their heads, and then put them in groups of 4 to 10 individual males in cages with microphones mounted directly outside, and a day-night cycle of 13 hours and 11 hours, a simulated day-night cycle. They then just monitored them for 7 days and analyzed their song. And they noted that there was very clear and consistent patterns to their frequency changes from evening, or from morning to afternoon to evening. If all this pattern that you can see in the bigger graph, where you have, it starts low in the morning, rises fairly sharply toward the afternoon, is a higher frequency overall in the afternoon, and then dips way back down to a low frequency in the evening. And it's overall highest pitch in the afternoon and overall much lower pitch in the evening. And what's most important to us is the smaller graph, which shows the average between the two. In the morning, it's a significantly higher pitch than in the evening, which is significantly lower pitch.
So multiple studies have found that song is influenced by external factors in the morning and the evening. And our data results show that the chickadee call generally has a lower frequency in the evening than in the morning. And here are some possible reasons why this is. Singing is presumably more costly in the morning rather than at night because of colder air temperatures or not having food overnight. Higher ranking males sing a longer song at dawn. Singing a higher frequency could reduce noise signal masking. And it's possible that chickadees that live in a more urban area would sing with a lower frequency when the environment is quieter. And high frequency sounds are loud and combat noises, which is why when the surrounding environment has loud noises, the song of the chickadee increases in frequency. A study by Gill et al. In 2014 concluded that species and populations who normally sing closer to the time when aircraft traffic peaks has a larger advance in their dawn chorus. And black-capped chickadees can sing lower frequency sounds for a longer duration, which also goes along with our results. And then by having a higher frequency song in the morning, they're expending less energy in the morning. And then also low frequency sounds travel farther than high frequency sounds. So it's possible that their evening calls are purposed more as a location call. For our we found that there is a difference in the frequency range of the chickadee song in the morning versus the evening. And in the morning, the frequency is higher, whereas in the evening it's lower. And we found that the length of the song was shorter in the morning versus the afternoon. And another study we found to compare with was by Demko and Menil in 2019. And it showed that rufous-capped warblers have longer songs in the morning versus the rest of the day, which is the opposite of our results, which showed that the black-capped chickadee has a shorter song in the morning and a longer song in the evening. But this could be explained by the different external environmental conditions such as temperature, food, or loud noises. And as we took our data, our recordings, we are in a more urban area, so all of the recordings that we took where the frequency of the song was higher, there was traffic noise in the background of the recording.
So you suggested that, well, I guess a question about song duration. You didn't show a real structure below the structure of the song, so I couldn't tell from your sonograms. But is it possible that the shorter song duration in the morning was simply due to them cutting out the higher frequencies in the morning?
The higher frequencies were very similar from the morning and evening. It was the lower frequencies that were different for the chicken song.
Oh, there was, I thought I heard you say that they sang lower frequencies in the morning. The other way around?
It's low, it's higher
Oh.
frequencies in the afternoon than the
Well,
morning, but
whichever,
lower.
whichever. Is it possible the shorter duration? I guess what I'm asking is it possible the shorter duration was due to them cutting out a certain component of the frequencies, or are those frequencies expressed as harmonics?
The duration was not a significant difference between evening and morning, so.
Well, I must have been hearing you totally wrong, because I thought I heard you say that their songs were shorter. Did I just
The
miss that?
average, the actual values were average and shorter, but it was not within a statistically significant difference.
One thing that I guess we're talking about that that's somewhat like not whatever. So in the Otter citation, Otter et al. 1997, they saw that in their chickadee study that there was the higher ranked males would sing longer, and so one thing that could maybe explain why we didn't say that was the fact that maybe there was just more females around, like those were the females that we reported because we tend to stay in one area, or they were just the less the lower ranked males, so that could be a potential factor.
Actually, stay on that slide for a second. So I'm gonna ask one more question and I'll shut up. The very first bullet point there, you talked about song being more costly. You mean the song is more costly? Or because I'm trying to understand how when you sing a song changes the cost of the song, or is spending the energy to sing the song at that point not something they want to do simply because they're spending more energy on thermal regulation and they don't have the energy stores because they have meeting all night.
What we meant by costly was that it's expending more energy, so it presumably would take more energy to sing in the morning or to sing.
Why would that be the case?
Well, because according to the study, colder air temperatures would affect that, or not having food overnight.
Yeah, that sounds to be more like they're making a choice not to spend the energy on singing. Because I guess you could argue the temperature might impact the cost of song, although I'm not exactly sure how, because they're made up there. But not having food overnight would have no impact on that whatsoever. It sounds to me like they're just making a choice not to budget energy for singing at that point. Okay. All right, thank you. Certainly not least. We get to hear about white-crowned sparrows, some of our most prolific.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for this, that's a good.
Oh, it was. He didn't call me that.
Yes.
All right. There you go.
Okay, so we are doing a presentation on the white crowned sparrow. My name is Evan Kiddo.
Cole Florio.
Cuckoo. So the white crowned sparrow is an order of Passeriformes and family Passerellidae. They have a very small size, and it's hard to believe these measurements. Their length is 7 inches. The ones we've seen, I don't know if that's correct, but the wingspan is 9.5 inches and their weight is 29 grams. They're found throughout North America and they mix freely with golden crowned sparrows in the winter. So some identification, the adults are dark lored, so are the immature white-crowned sparrows, but they're a large grayish sparrow with long tail, peaked head shape, small bill, typical of sparrows, and it can be orange or sometimes yellow or pinkish. And the adults have very bold white and black stripes on the head, as you guys probably all know. But the immature white-crowned sparrows, the main difference is the rusty brown stripes on the gray hat. As you can see, there's still differentiation between color, which is indicative of the white-crowned sparrow, but it's not white or black until they are fully mature. Song background.
So generally speaking, the white-crowned sparrows are known to have about 10 different calls, with the most frequently used being the alarm call. They don't really have any preference for daylight or nighttime. They'll sing either time of day, although they'll typically sing more frequently during the morning hours. And when they're at their most active, they can sing at about 15 times within a single minute. By the time they're about 2 to 3 months old, will have already learned their song, and they typically learn their song from their neighborhoods rather than from their fathers like some birds do. And there is some evidence that they're genetically inclined to learn their own song. In the year 2000, a study by Soa and Waller found that juveniles, when exposed to their own song, in addition to songs from a ton of other different species, played over a recording, the birds are able to detect their own song and reproduce it relatively well. And this was despite the fact that there were no adults present in this study, so they had to learn it on their own. The white-crowned sparrow song is distinguishable by an introductory whistle with several conspecific notes. So it'll start off with a prolonged whistle, with the body having a series of several notes that only the white-crowned sparrow will sing. And knowing these key features are what helps the young white-crowned sparrows identify their own native song. And what's kind of interesting is that throughout the course of the bird's acquisition phase, they will be sensitive to different parts of their songs and learn different parts of their song that way. In the year 2001, a study by Soa and Waller found that younger juveniles, so about 10 to 20 days old, were more receptive to their conspecific notes, so the series of notes within the body, rather than the introductory whistle. In this study, when the conspecific notes were obscured, the birds tended to learn the song not as well as the birds who learned as the control birds. And the presence of the introductory whistle didn't really have an effect on how well the young birds were able to learn their song. Whereas older juveniles between 20 to 79 days old rely a little bit more on the introductory whistle to identify their song. In this different study by Soa and Marler, they found that the absence of an introductory whistle kind of inhibited the bird from being able to refine their song, whereas obscuring the conspecific notes didn't really have as much of an effect. So while those last two studies studied birds learning their song in the absence of an adult, there are some social aspects that have been found to influence bird song, or the white-crowned sparrow song. In a study by Batista and Petrinovic, they found that white-crowned sparrows, they do greatly benefit from a social tutor when they're learning their song. So in this study, they found that these sparrows will even prefer to learn a foreign song from a foreign tutor if the foreign tutor is physically present and singing their song, rather than a song from a white-crowned sparrow that's just being played over a recording. And in a similar experiment, these young sparrows also learned to sing the song of a hermit thrush tutor, and they were able to reproduce frequencies that they're not normally known to produce at all in the wild. Throughout the course of their acquisition phase, the telencephalic nuclei within the brain, which is towards the top of the brain, are essential for song learning, but they're also essential throughout the course of the bird's life as well. These nuclei will become engorged or enlarged when the male is nearing breeding season. And this has been found to be true even for deaf birds. There was a study that where the researchers surgically deafened the birds, so they couldn't even learn their own song. Although their brains still showed signs of telencephalic nuclei enlargements, no different than that of controls. For adult white-crowned sparrows, the males and females both sing, although the males sing a little bit more often than the females. And the males can also be bilingual. So because the males typically learn their song from the neighborhood that they're in, they can also pick up songs from other neighborhoods if they live on the borders of two different neighborhoods. So they'll learn the dialect of the neighbors as well as their own dialect. And females, when they do choose to sing, it's typically only to defend a territory or a food source. And their songs are also quieter and have more variability than the male songs.
My voice kind of hurts, so.
Let's see how this goes.
So this is a cool study. Prior to the pandemic, the white-crowned sparrow song had to be louder and more coarse in order for it to be heard by mates. As Taylor said, only the male really sing as much. This isn't too much. That makes sense. In females, due to the decrease in noise pollution, the bird has finally been able to soften his voice a little bit. It could sing a little bit quieter. They've decreased about 7 decibels in their sound, or about 55%. And this is due to the Lombard effect, which says that the louder the environment, the louder the call. And this is promising news because it does mean that the bird has been able to adapt pretty quickly. However, it can be a little bit stressful now that the pandemic's kind of coming to an end. How are these birds going to respond to that? Are they going to die? Are they just not going to be able to respond? Or are they going to be able to respond just as quick as they were able to change it the first time? And the fact that the song is about 35% softer, whereas the Lombard effect was predicted only about 3%, which shows how loud they were, how hoarse their voice were, how they just were screaming in order to make sound, as well as just show the acoustics outside, they don't it just carries more because they don't have to shout. Yeah, migration. So these birds, for the most part, are permanent residents, especially in Oregon. They don't transfer or travel too far. The farthest is about 4,200 kilometers, which is very far, but for the most part, they could be seen to be more permanent. And they do interact with each other, the migrants and the residents. So if you're trying to figure out subspecies of these birds, good luck. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Okay. You just go.
Yeah. Me too. We'll figure this out.
Oh my god, can you hold this?
We'll just stand there on top. Sure did. Okay. Yeah, we're doing it. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting study. It's a microgeographic song variation in white-crowned sparrow, and this is relevant to our study because it's we'll get to it, but our hypothesis has to do with this study. And the question is, can geographic variation in birdsong dialects be used to infer historical processes involved in dialect formation? And the gist of this study is they wanted to see if there's a geographical barrier such as the Bay, or so they did this in San Francisco Bay. And is there a difference between song in white-crowned sparrows in different islands that are isolated? So they haven't had contact with each other ever. And what they found was there were differences in song types concerning variation in syntax, syllable, shapes, and spectral and temporal features. And the male dispersal or the song dispersal or spread of song characteristics were predominantly from island to island. So this is important moving forward because depending on where you are and the isolation and difference in song is due to kind of like the male. When they learn their songs, they learn from other males, and that kind of like trickles down to generation. And they did find a difference in songs. This other study I included this because it was a really cool study. It was longitudinal of 35 years over the same area in San Francisco Bay, and then the same islands over 35 years by one person. And he wanted to study, is there like a difference in micro. So our study was on George Fox campus, and it was over different locations. And so this study was in different locations with different variations of vegetation and obstructions from their environment of the white-crowned sparrow. And they wanted to see if there was a difference in song depending on how thick the vegetation was or what their environment was. And they did find that there was a difference in especially pitch of the white-crowned sparrows, and the higher the vegetation that these sparrows lived in, the higher their song was basically. So they inferred that there could be a correlation between how high or how much vegetation and how that affects like their travel of song, because there's like obstructions to their song. And how high these birds sing. And they suggested that the variation in factors affect the signal production, and it could contribute to variation. And it was actually just one person.
All right, so we wanted to look at, given the effects that we know that birds from different populations, when they're isolated, sing slightly different songs. So our question basically asked, we did an interspecific song comparing individuals on this campus, and we wanted to know, based off their song, do we think that the white-crowned sparrows on the campus all originated from the same area? And so our hypothesis was that if white-crowned sparrow songs are similar, then they're native to either this geographical location or from where they're from. And if they're different, then they have either migrated from a different area, be it Alaska or California, and they're not a resident bird, and that they're simply moving through here. And for our methods, so we recorded 4 different individuals on the campus. One was by Stevens Building, Edwards, and then there was one in the Canyon and one by Wheeler Bridge. And then the songs were analyzed for similarities. So this is the first song that we got by Stevens Center. Oh, no. There we go. So this is the sonogram. As you can see, it has this distinct 4 chirp ending right here, and you can kind of see it. It's kind of blurred out because of the car in the background. The next ones are better. There weren't as many things around. But as you can see, this distinctive 4 chirp ending is what we started to compare, since this is the first song that we looked at. Then as we compare it to the Edwards birds, you'll hear that similar distinct 4 chirp ending, albeit it is, there we go. So while it has this initial bigger burst, it ends in the same 4 chirp, this 1, 2, 3, 4. And that sort of was our basis for our analysis. As you'll see with the next few songs, that they do not have that same 4 chirp ending. And as we moved into more isolated parts of the campus, as Edwards and Stevens are both very high traffic areas, a lot of people walk through them on a daily basis. Wheeler Bridge, while it is a bridge that I'm sure everyone has walked on, that was more of a reference point. It wasn't exactly on the bridge, it was right off to the side of it. And the bird was down a little more closer in the canyon. It was a little more private. And you'll notice that on this bird, it has more, come on, there we go. It doesn't have this 4 pitch ending. It's higher pitched, and it's followed by clacks rather than the distinct 4 chirps. And that led us to sort of think that that bird probably isn't from the same population, or at least learned the song from a different mentor or tutor than the first 2 birds. And the final recording we got was from the canyon. And as you can see, this is a much more, erratic pattern than the other ones. The first two specifically had that 4 chirp. This one seems to be split up much more in intermittent trills almost, especially if you can look right here. Right here in this part. While it does have this weird 4 chirp ending, they're not distinct as the initial 2 from Stevens and Edwards. And that led us to think that this bird, as well as the one from Wheeler Bridge, likely learned their song from a different mentor. And our results, so the Edward and Stephen birds have very similar songs. The beginnings were slightly different, but they had the distinct 4 chirp ending. And both the Wheeler Bridge bird and the Canyon bird have very different songs from the first 2. The Edward and Stephen birds are likely native to this area, or at least come from the same population. And our kind of reasoning for why we believe those 2 specifically are from this native region was their location. Like a lot of animals, you'll notice if they're more comfortable with humans, the longer they've been in contact with them, in the sense of those birds, since their locations on campus, they're used to people walking by them all the time. They weren't as scared. You could get really close to them with audio equipment. While the Wheeler and Canyon birds were much more tucked away where there's less foot traffic through, which would be a bird that's maybe not used to that amount of human activity. And that's why we likely think that those birds come from different areas, maybe not potentially migrated, like from Alaska or something, but maybe simply from like Tualatin or Champoeg, where they travel short distance, but they're used to less human contact. There's our literature cited. Questions?
Questions? So do you think that you could use the song structure? I thought the question was a real creative one. Do you think that you could use your differences in song structure to kind of isolate where they come from?
Yeah, we definitely could have. We probably should have compared it to like known bird locations. So like taken like say for instance from a place that has distinct, that you know this bird is from, say, Alaska, and then compared that song structure to that one specifically to see, does this actually like at least match or at least or similar to it, and then take ones distinctively from we could have gone to Tualatin and then compared it just to make sure, these are Oregon, this is an Oregon bird, this is a California, Nevada, stuff like that. So I think we definitely could have compared it a little more specifically.
Other questions? Alrighty, well, as sad as I am to say it, that's a wrap. That's all, folks. Well, good luck the rest of the week for your finals. I will endeavor to get final grades done as quickly as I can. I'm still in the midst of doing research scenario reports for explorations, but as soon as I get done with that, your exam will be next up on my queue. So, and that'll probably take me a couple more days, I think. So, okay. All righty.
For letting Catherine and myself join you. It was wonderful. We had a great time. It was a joy. It was.